Hello and welcome to another Tuesday Talk with Ruby Reese. My name is Killian. I am co-founder at Ruby Reese and I will also be your host. This week we've been thinking a lot about cortisol and the stress hormone and stress management because it comes up in lots and lots of the podcast topics that we speak about on this podcast. So I suppose stress makes it very, very difficult sometimes for our dogs to learn new information and to integrate into new social situations that they might not be used to. And it adds an extra challenge when there's cortisol pumping through their veins to be able to take on this new information and realize what's being asked of them. And I think it can be good to think about, when you're working with a professional, be that a trainer or a behaviourist with your dog. I think sometimes it's worthwhile seeing the value in the steps that they're trying to take you through. Maybe you're not working immediately on the issue that you'd like solved, but first of all, getting to a place where you're building trust, you're trying to reduce that cortisol, you're trying to reduce that stress response, you're trying to build routines where your dog can feel more comfortable in working with you, I suppose. And we need to give a little bit more gravity to how important these steps are. And working with a professional to get to this point, I think is something that can be really, really valuable, so that your dog can take on new information. We all know how it can feel when we're having a really, really stressful time and stresses are compounding on top of each other. And I suppose lots of us know stress from work, stress from school, but also imagine, when you're in pain. So the stress that you can feel and how narky you might be if you had a broken arm and didn't have painkillers for it, or if you sprained your ankle, but nobody noticed and nobody took you to a hospital, and you were kind of dealing with that pain on an ongoing basis, even in the short term, that you might be less open to new ideas, be less open for, let's learn a new language. If someone came up to you and said, would you like to learn a few words of Japanese, but you were in that moment were dealing not only with the stress and pressure of being late to get to an appointment, but also everything else was going badly as well. Like you had that pain from your sprained foot, and it was raining, and you were confused and upset, and you'd be unlikely to want to learn Japanese or Spanish on the side of the road while going through all of these pressures as well. So I think this is worth then transferring over to the idea of our dogs dealing with cortisol pumping through their veins and being in a stressful situation. And we need to see stressors as extra levels of challenge, I suppose, when we're trying to deliver new information to our dogs. It's definitely worth thinking about, if you're teaching your dog even something simple like how to give the paw for the first time. If you're doing that in a setting that your dog is comfortable in and they're likely to not have a lot of distractions but also not a lot of stress, this is going to be presumably an awful lot easier than, say, if you also decided to do this at the side of a busy motorway, that your dog had also not gotten used to. So then there's sights, sounds, smells, everything is new, and then you're trying to help deliver new information to them. It's going to be much more challenging. So I think we do need to think about cortisol and how stress can impact and make situations more challenging for our dogs. And I suppose we see a lot of responses to stress and a lot of different things coming out. And this week's topic is definitely something that lots of people struggle with. And I suppose it's worthwhile knowing that you're not alone and that there is a path through separation anxiety. And in speaking with separation anxiety, I think there's few people better equipped to speak to about the topic than Lea Chevalier, and I am now delighted to introduce Lea and let you listen in to the conversation that we had all about separation anxiety. Hello, Lea. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us on the podcast this week.
Hi.
How are you
Thank
doing?
you so much for having me. Sorry. Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm very good, very excited to be chatting to you.
And I'm delighted to be chatting with you as well. Would you do us the pleasure of introducing yourself briefly?
Okay, so I am Lea. I don't know if that's relevant, but I'm French. I've been working as a dog trainer and behavior coach for 3 years and a half now in Dublin. The name of my company is Harmony for Paws because I really believe in harmonious relationships within households with our dogs, and I definitely think they're a big part of our families. So it is really important to be able to understand them and to in order to cohabitate with them in a peaceful manners. I am specialized in separation anxiety training, meaning helping dogs feeling happier when they're home alone, making sure they're always comfortable with the setup, with the fact that we're leaving. Obviously, they will never be thrilled that we're leaving, but we want them to be comfortable and relaxed with it and not to think that is the end of their word.
Yeah. And like you've picked both for the topic of this conversation and for your career pretty much as a specialization, you've picked one of the most serious and probably pressing issues really that's out there, like separation anxiety. You hear about it quite a lot. So you mentioned already a little bit, it's the fear of us leaving. So is this exactly what separation anxiety is, and how can people identify it?
Okay, so separation anxiety is a very generic terms. We would be speaking more of separation-related behaviors, which means behavior that are happening only or in a greater intensity when we're not around. So for some dogs, it could be just when their person is leaving that they're getting really distressed. Some other dogs will be happy with anybody that's around. So those obviously will be happier, like in for example, getting minded. So there's a lot of different forms of separation related behavior, but yeah, those would be the two main categories, like isolation distress. So that's the dogs that just need somebody with them. And like the clinical separation anxiety is actually those dogs that can't really be left with anybody else than their figures of attachment. A few of those behaviors can also be linked to a bit of frustration. Like, for example, a dog that feels like they're missing out on something incredible the second they see the humans getting ready to leave, for example. So that kind of behaviors would be linked to the dog feeling, oh my God, something is happening and I'm not going to be part of it. And then the whole thing ends up being a big state of distress. A big part of the separation issues can also be triggered by underlying health conditions. Like obviously a dog that's in pain is going to want their humans next to them way more than if they were actually feeling fine.
Yeah, and you often see these things, it's always holistic, isn't it? It's the whole dog's life, I guess, is going to make a huge impact.
Yeah, definitely. Like the separation anxiety would just be really the tip of the iceberg. So before even thinking of treating the separation anxiety, that's just the symptom, really. You have a lot of work in terms of foundation, making sure the dog is like, you have a whole idea of what the dog's life is. You have a good overview of the general behavior. Because a dog, for example, that can't relax at all, even when the humans are around, they are not really able to relax when they're on their own. And that makes sense, because if they can't relax with people around, why would they when they're on their own?
Yes. And so are we saying that clinical separation anxiety is an issue in itself, and then everything else is almost a symptom of other problems?
The clinical separation anxiety could also be the symptom of something different. Like
Okay.
it could be the symptom of generalized anxiety, it could be underlying pain, it's just um, a different expression of a problem. And it
Yeah.
is obviously way harder to manage for the owners that when they have a dog that they can't leave with anybody else. Because obviously, if you have a dog that doesn't like to be on their own, but they're fine if you leave them with your parents, with your friends, with a dog minder,
Hmm.
it is a lot of management, obviously, to have those options lined up. But it is still, I'd say, easier than a dog that won't be happy and that will be very distressed if they're not with you or another figure of attachment.
And would you say that, like, I suppose this is always going to be a question. Is it more nature or nurture then? Does this question come up a lot?
What do you mean?
Well, is this an issue that a dog inherently is born with, or is it something that is caused by their environment, their situation? I suppose our handling of them as well.
It could be a mix of
It could be
everything,
either.
really, but this is actually one of the subjects that is debated a lot among
Hmm.
scientists because the true causes of separation anxiety are still a bit uncertain. But genetics, of course, could be playing a part of this.
Hmm.
The environment the dogs are bred in could be a part of it. The like basically whether they've been able to form secure relationships even with the mom, for example, before that. Like a lot of things are actually playing in the like it's weighting in the balance in the scale, sorry, but my French is resurfacing sometimes. Um, but like any dog can get separation anxiety for sure, and it is
Hmm.
not natural for dogs to be on their own as well. Like
Yeah.
they're social animals, and for them, initially to be separated from the group means danger.
Yes, absolutely. And don't ever apologize for your French coming through. It's brilliant. It's only enriching to the rest of us listening in. Um, so what was I going to say? I suppose like one of the big issues really is that there's a lot of psychology, canine psychology going on here, and it's very difficult to ask the dogs what they're thinking and feeling, isn't it? Is
Oh,
that what makes it
definitely.
difficult?
Definitely. And the thing we have to keep in mind when we're trying to help a dog feeling better is that we're playing with their emotions. Like we are trying
Hmm.
to change an emotion towards something. And of course, it is going to take more time than to teach them how to go to bed, for example,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
this is not linked to obedience or anything else. And a lot of my clients, I hear them saying, "Oh, my dog is really obedient, but they can't be on their own." I'm like, "Yeah, this is two completely unrelated things." And they're telling me, "Oh, my dog is really good." Of course, every dog is very good in the first place. They're just struggling. They're not trying to get back at the owner. They're not trying to annoy them. They're just having a very, very hard time the second they're on their own. And all the annoying behavior that we can see, they're actually just the expression of like a very, very deep distress.
Okay, and I suppose this is one of the misconceptions that the dog is being bold. That's not usually the case. It's not that they're planning just to destroy your
No,
day.
fortunately for us, I'd say they're not able to plot because an adult
Yeah.
dog, there's debate in literature whether their cognitive and thinking abilities are equivalent to a 2 or 3 years old kid.
Hmm.
So they don't have that capacity to just be like, okay, they're gone. I'm just going to destroy the couch because they've left me just to get back at them. Because that would involve the dog knowing that your couch is something that's expensive,
Hmm.
that you're going to have to buy a new one, all that kind of things. Like what they're doing is just
Yes,
expressing that
they
they're
need to
not
know.
happy at all. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
freaking out, really, having a panic attack. And they're
Yes.
like, oh my God, what am I going to do to get out of that situation? And sometimes the fear is just so bad that they will just do whatever they can to help themselves feel better.
Yes. Yeah. And I suppose you touched on a really good point there. The dog doesn't know that a sofa is expensive, but they also don't understand the concept of money, the concept of economy, the concept of
No.
capitalism. Like they just don't get it. It's not something that they don't go in there with your knowledge to kind of ruin the sofa, like
We'd
you
be in
say.
trouble if they had that kind of thinking abilities. Like,
Exactly. And what are some other misconceptions that you hear quite a lot about separation anxiety?
I'd say one of the biggest ones would be that people gave too much attention to the dog, and that's why they had separation anxiety, or
Hmm.
that they left them sleeping in their beds with them. It is absolutely not true. If you have a dog that's freaking out the second they don't see you, having them to sleep with you can actually help them feeling more comfortable and having a good night's sleep. Because if they're really distressed being in a different room, being next to you is actually going to help them chilling, as opposed as being in the next room, they would be just stressed most of the time and they won't rest properly, and that will have an impact on their ability to be separated from you as well. So if I'm not saying people need to sleep with their dogs, it's up to everybody and what they want to do. But if you feel like you want to sleep with your dog and you enjoy it and it's not ruining your night of sleep, please do it.
Yeah. And so do I understand this correctly? When it comes to separation anxiety, we're not spoiling our dogs. That's not what's really causing the big
No, no,
issues
no,
here.
absolutely not. Like a dog can be as spoiled as they want. Like mine, for example, is the most spoiled dog in the world. And I don't like that term because they should be spoiled. They're only with us for a very limited amount of time. They haven't chosen to live with us. So I wouldn't feel like spoiling is a really like accurate term because we should spoil them and that should be the normal. Like if you want to provide your dog with the best food, the best toys, like all the best walks in the world. This is not spoiling. This is just answering to their needs and trying to make them happy and making yourself happy. So it should be, to me, it should be that way.
And this is something that we're hearing over and over again from the best minds across Ireland and across Europe in canine behavior and all the rest of it. That treating your dog well is something really really beautiful. And I love the way you summed it up. We their dogs are with us for such a short time. We should be giving them the best possible life
Yeah.
possible. So
And they
it's
haven't asked to be stuck in a home with us. And because the environment us humans live in, it's very, very far from what they were initially bred for. And we gotta, like, it's not that we force them. I'm sure they're pretty happy to be with us. It's just that we're making them cohabitate with us. So we should make sure, like, the lack of freedom is actually compensated with satisfying their needs, like a bit of enrichment, for example, like daily walks, depending on how the dog is comfortable outside as well. It's not like some dogs actually are really stressed outside. And in that case, that's a different story. But we should make sure we can actually provide a nice life for them and a
Mhm.
nice daily life with us.
And we've focused a lot on how the dogs are feeling through all of this, but I think it's also worthwhile looking at the other end of the lead. How can separation anxiety have an impact on the human at the other end of the lead?
I think this is one of the behavior issue that has the biggest
Hmm.
impact on humans, because basically you're trapped in your home. And if you want to address it in a fear-free and ethical way, you have to go at the dog's rhythm,
Hmm.
meaning making sure they're comfortable with it. So that's usually what I tell my client when we start working together. It is going to take a long time, so you need a very, very strong management system. So you don't have to leave unexpectedly, and you always have a solution lined up in case you do need to leave. And you only leave the dog during the controlled setup of the training. And at the
Hmm.
beginning, in the first few phases of the training, it is barely going outside the front door. So you have to have a very strong support system. Like it really takes a village. Yeah, I'd say it is like I'm very, very like I have a lot of respect for all my clients that are going through this and that are sticking with the program, because I know how much it is limiting, like in terms of, like, you can't, for example, go out to a nightclub because you can't bring your dog. You can't, like, for example, you're on your own at home and you need a pint of milk. You can't go get that without planning it ahead and finding a solution for your dog before you go. All of those little things, they just become more and more complicated. And I find it has even a bigger impact when it is a household with only one person that's with the dog. Because obviously you can't leave the dog with your partner because they need to be with somebody. And it's like, in those cases, I find it very, very hard for them to keep like working on it, keeping their keeping the commitment and all of that. But in the same time, you don't really have a choice, because if you want to resolve the problem and you don't want to use any aversive, it does take time, because we're working on reversing the dog's emotions and making them think that what they thought was the scariest thing in the world is actually okay. So just reverting that state of mind when they see you going, that's what takes a lot of time. And yeah, it is a very, very heavy thing, and very it takes a lot of commitment, basically.
Yes.
And I'm very, very in awe of the people who are actually going through that process.
It sounds like it's a long process, and obviously it's a big issue that you have to break down into pieces and kind of work through. And like you say, it's really inspiring to see the success stories. But I suppose, do you see a lot of people coming to you or to other professionals around the country thinking that it's a much shorter process, and thinking that 1 or 2 sessions and we might be done?
Yeah, usually I can tell, like, some people know more on the subject than others, but some, they will like, oh, we're gonna see you and then our problem's gonna be fixed. I'm like, I wish it was the case, but there's so many things. And sometimes even during a first consultation, we don't even address the separation anxiety, because there's so many other things that are going on in the dog's life. And there's so many situations where, for example, if the dog gets stressed when they're going outside, and there is other issues like reactivity, for example, every time the dog gets over threshold, every time the dog has a reaction, it is just producing a lot of cortisol in their body, and that stays there for a while. So then, of course, the dog is going to struggle so much more if you're doing your training just after that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, I suppose you have to look at both sides of it. So it's it's a long process, and I think it's important that people listening in, especially if someone's just typed in separation anxiety podcast into Google and managed to stumble across this, it's important that everyone understands that it could potentially be quite a long process. But I suppose it was great to hear as well that you see so many success stories over time as well, that it's it's a doable process, right?
I think every person that has stick to it for as long as it took got there. It's just taking the time, putting the work in, and not giving up, because the progress is never really linear. So one day you're going to have a dog that's able to be like, to stay for like 15 minutes on their own comfortably, and maybe the next day they're going to start struggling after 5 minutes. So but it is normal. And actually, I got a message from a client last night, and she was like, oh, I had to stop the session at 9 minutes. And the session was supposed to be like 19 or something like that. And she was like, oh, I'm like really distressed about it. And I told her, like, we've been through that before, and the dog has progressed again after that. And I need to be there to remind them, this is normal. This is a part of the process, and you need to trust that down the line she will get there. It's just, not getting too discouraged with this. And as a human being, it is very easy to get discouraged with all of this, obviously.
Of course. Our nature is kind of trained to want the quick successes and and like the quick rewards. And I'm, you kind of mentioned something there that, you know, the it's about showing up every day
Yeah.
and working with what you've got. How much does routine contribute to helping with separation anxiety cases?
It does contribute a lot because for
Hmm.
dogs, it's really important to have something in their life that's predictable and that they kind of know what's going to happen on a daily basis. Obviously, it is also important to have dogs that can cope with a bit of change in the routine because life happens sometimes and some days are not going to be the same ones. But routine is a very, very important thing. Like the dogs need to feel safe. They need a bit of predictability in their life. And they need to be able to project themselves, be like, okay, today they're not going to work. This is what we're going to do. Um, so yeah, so it can vary. Like in the first steps, we're not really trying to even build up time outside the door. When we're working on the dog's environment, their routine, how the walks, all of that, basically, just all the foundation, making sure the dog is able to chill even with their owners around. Because if they're not able to do that, they won't be able to chill when they're gone. So there's always a whole like initial work to do on that before you can even start addressing the separation anxiety.
Hmm. And I'm sure you get asked quite a lot from people, particularly that get puppies or newly adopted dogs. Are there ways of preventing separation anxiety or your chances of separation anxiety developing in general?
Preventing it completely, no, but there are a
Hmm.
lot of things that you can do to help your dog feeling secure within
Yeah.
the house. And that starts with going at their own rhythm. Like, for example, I wouldn't recommend getting a puppy and going to work for 6, 7 hours the next day. Like, they
Hmm.
need to settle, they need to, and even with a rescue dog that you just got, they need a little bit of time to decompress because they've left everything they knew, even if what they knew was the shelter. This is still a new environment with different people, with different, everything is different. So they need a bit of time to settle, so allowing them to do that, and for young puppies as well, it's really important to go gradually. And I hear a lot people feeling very guilty because they just got a puppy and they slept with the puppy the first few nights. I'm like, no, great, you did absolutely brilliant.
Hmm.
Because imagine like a 2, 3 months old little puppy that's just left on their own. They've been either with the mother, with their siblings, and then they end up in a house that they don't know, most of the time in a crate, and left on their own. So a lot of them, they will just stop whining and crying after a while because they've given up. But it does create a bit of distress to just be left like that. So I'd say going very gradually, making sure the puppy knows that whenever you're disappearing, you're coming back really quickly and building that up.
Hmm.
So it's just about making sure the puppy never really freaks out. And like, for example, starting with just going towards the door, like you go and touch the door and come back. And then you do that until the puppy is like, huh, whatever. So they don't really care anymore about this. Then you can start disappearing for half a second and then you're coming back and making sure they know that whenever they see you going, they're going to see you coming back really quickly after that. And trusting that, like, it does take a bit of time, and puppies are like more prone obviously to be distressed when they're being left. So it is really important, like when we're getting a puppy, to take that time, those few weeks, maybe months sometimes, until they're actually okay and they don't end up very, very distressed, because that those negative associations are formed and then it is so much harder to undo them after that.
Hmm. And I suppose then if negative things do come up, and if a dog or a puppy in particular starts to get destructive, even when you turn your back and go into the kitchen just for a minute, and your shoes are destroyed, or the sofa has been attacked, or whatever it is, how should we be reacting to this, and how do we try to minimize it in the future?
I'd say the destroying things is actually a symptom, one more time,
Hmm.
of either a need that's not been satisfied. And for puppies, eating the shoes, I wouldn't see anything that's more normal than this. Because for a puppy, everything that's been left and they're unsupervised is fair game.
Yeah.
Like they explore the world with their mouths. So if you leave a pair of shoes and they're expensive, I'd say maybe next time put them away. Because even like the couch, that's a bit of a different thing. But I wouldn't give out to the dog. I wouldn't try to punish them or anything, because if they've done it, it's because there is either something like maybe they need more chewing. Dogs need to be able to have things to chew on a daily basis. If they don't, they might attack your couch. Or maybe if they've been left and they haven't had enough exercise, they will be more keen maybe to attack the couch. So it is really important to figure out why they've done it. If they were just a bit bored, that's actually easier to solve than if they're actually really stressed because you were going in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So for the kitchen example, for example, I would leave the door open and do a lot of trips, like back and forth, until the puppy gets uninterested and is like, oh, why would I get up? Like, I'm tired. There's nothing that's happening there for me. I might actually choose to chill on the couch. And then maybe a bit later on, add a very good reason not to follow. So maybe a huge bone that they can't carry, a nice lick mat or something like that. But not always. That would just be a more like reinforcing to have that thing once they've actually decided that, oh, I might not get up. So that way you make it a more positive thing for them to stay where they are instead of coming with you.
And I suppose it's more mentally stimulating as well if things are kind of like occasional treats, if you're doing lots of different types of enriching activities, like giving them a toy here and kind of, like you say, licky mat there, and it doesn't have to be always the same situation, right?
No, for sure. And I wouldn't recommend using food for separation anxiety, because then, for example, let's say every time you're taking a chew or a lick mat out, the dog can start predicting, oh my God, they're going to leave me now. And that becomes a stress, like an element that's stressful for them already, because they start associating you taking the food out to the fact that you're leaving. So I wouldn't really recommend doing that. And also the other reason for that is because dogs that are very, very stressed, they won't even eat.
Yeah.
Like if you're in a house on fire and you're crying for help, you're screaming for help, you're trying to escape, you're not going to go make yourself a sandwich before you escape.
Exactly.
You're just going to really try to leave or do whatever gets you out of there. And the food doesn't even matter because they're too stressed, and then they probably will eat when the owner is back.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose, and then, so you wouldn't use particularly food. What about toys or tech gadgets or anything like that? Can these be useful in these cases?
They can be in some situations. Like, for example, when a dog that doesn't really have any separation anxiety and you're going to be gone for a few hours and you don't want them to be bored. Like sometimes when I leave something for my dog, but I know he doesn't have an issue with being left. Tech toys, I'd be very careful with it, because I don't know if the ones that you're referring to would be, for example, those cameras that throw treats.
For example.
I've seen dogs getting very, very fixated on that. On like waiting for the treat to come out. So you might, like, for example, if you have an emergency and you really need to go and you know your dog isn't ready, okay, but I wouldn't use that because that doesn't really promote relaxation. If the dog is always really like anticipating a treat to come out of the thing, they're not going to go and sleep. So I wouldn't think that would be like, it really depends on each dog, but I would feel like if you're expecting something to come out all the time, you're not going to be able to chill.
Yes, and it probably becomes more of an obsession or maybe even an addiction as opposed to something that's super enriching, like by the 100th time. Yeah,
definitely. And in a general way, that kind of like fixation and obsessed behavior, it's things that we want to address in the first place. So reinforcing it with treats that keep coming out of maybe there are some exceptions, but I've seen dogs getting very upset and very amped up, like expecting the next treat to come. And what happens if that thing breaks down? Like you're in trouble.
Problem. Yeah, absolutely. And so do we see separation anxiety getting worse if it's left untreated? Is it something that's linear? Yes. Okay.
Absolutely. In some cases, dogs will just like what we would say be used to, get used to it.
Hmm.
But it can lead, like separation anxiety that's not treated, can lead to very serious welfare issues. Like it is a health concern when a dog is exposed to that amount of stress on a daily basis that has an impact in their general health and in their mental health. Um, like like for us, like when we're like people, if we're experiencing anxiety, it isn't good for us, and we get treatments for that. Dogs
Hmm.
are the same. And the dogs that do get used to it, I'd say sometimes it can be what's called learned helplessness, meaning the dog has tried everything to get out of that situation and they just ended up accepting that they're stuck. They stopped barking because there's no point, nobody's going to rescue them. Or
Hmm.
they stopped trying to escape because they can't break out of that room. And they just like that's not a really like pleasant feeling for a dog to be like to have given up, really being like, oh, okay, I'm stuck, there's nothing I can do, so I might as well just accept it.
Mm. And would you say there are situations where either medication or calming supplements might be effective for dogs with severe anxiety, separation anxiety?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Medication can be a great support because some dogs have a threshold that's so low
Hmm.
that it is hard to get them to make and to learn anything and to make any progress. So sometimes the anxiety medication will be a good way to take the edge off a little bit and to help the dog processing the information a bit more.
Hmm.
Although there is one thing that I think is really important is before we go and have the dog on anxiety medication, any other physical concern should be ruled out like thoroughly, not just going to the vet and be like, oh no, they're fine. Just really thoroughly checking for pain, maybe doing a pain trial beforehand. Because if you're trying to sort something that's caused to the dog being in some form of pain with anxiety medication, that ends up being highly unethical.
Hmm. Of course. Makes so much sense that you also look at the holistic side, and it doesn't have to be anxiety medication that's helping. Maybe it's a different type of medication that's
Yeah.
taking away the pain or whatever they're experiencing, the inflammation maybe. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we need to really look at the general picture. And during the first consultation, what I will go through with clients is what the dog is fed, what their
Hmm.
sorry for the what their poops look like,
Sure.
what kind of exercise they're getting, how are the walks going, and sometimes we will even go for a little walk just to see, because people are like, oh, my dog has walked an hour and a half a day, so that's brilliant. But if the dog is very anxious during walks, maybe those walks are actually not doing them any good, and then we need to address that first, so that way the dog can actually have an enrichment that's adapted to them and not just walks where they're on edge all the time. So everything really is to consider before, like anxiety medication, yes, absolutely, if it is adapted to that dog.
And we love the holistic approach at Ruby Reese. Definitely, we love to hear it and believe in it so completely. Also, if anyone's listening in now and is you know a little bit concerned about pain, we actually did an episode a couple of weeks ago with Killian from Little Woofers. So you can also check out that episode because, like you say, everything links together
Yeah,
and it comes together to build a better picture.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. I'm a big fan
and
of
I'm
Katrin and Killian.
Yes, absolutely. Really, really thorough and great work that they do. Um, so I was thinking as well, there might be people listening in that already work long hours. They might be concerned that their dog could be, you know, maybe not getting anxious, but might be at home for long hours. Do you have any advice for those people that are listening in?
I'd say if they have the option of maybe getting somebody coming for a visit, maybe just half an hour in the middle of the day, or ideally somebody that could walk them, for example, for an hour to break out the day in two.
Hmm.
In that case, if the dog doesn't have any like specific anxiety problems, maybe leaving a bit of enrichment with them, maybe a nice lick mat, maybe a snuffle mat with a bit of their food, a long-lasting chew. And for example, if the dog is spending already an hour chewing on something, they're gonna be so much happier after that, and they'll snooze because they'll be more tired. So yeah,
Hmm.
so finding like pet sitting options or things like that. In some cases, daycare can be a good option as well. It doesn't suit every dog, obviously, because some dogs are happier just at home. Like I know mine, for example, even if I have to leave him for 6 hours, he'd rather be at home on his own for 6 hours than in a field with other dogs chasing him around.
Yeah.
It really is dog dependent, but that could be a solution if your dog likes other dogs and you're sure they're comfortable. Within a small group, I would think that could be highly beneficial. Or having
Hmm.
just sometimes a friend coming in midday and letting them out and playing with them a little bit, and then that way that kind of breaks up their whole day. I'd say that could be a good thing to do.
Makes sense. And it's all about setting your dog up for success, really, isn't it? Just
Yeah,
going in on the individual, understanding what their likes and dislikes are, figuring out what could work for them, and then playing it from there. I suppose it's always a case of tweaking, isn't it?
yeah, for sure. And finding out as well where they'd be happier being left, for example. Like some
Hmm.
dogs will feel happier chilling in a room that they're very used to hanging out, like the bedroom, for example. Some dogs, like I know this is where I find mine when I get home each time. I open the door and I hear tick, 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 and then I see him like getting off the bed. He loves being there, and I know if I have to leave for a longer time, he'll be happier in our bedroom.
Yeah, he knows what he likes, and he's
Oh yeah.
he's comfortable there.
And
And
we
I suppose it's always about setting up as well, a group, a team of experts to solve these cases, isn't it? People that
yeah,
can look
definitely.
at pain and look at medication and the rest of it.
Yeah. And there's always like so many different aspects of the training. So I'd say my ideal scenario would be, for example, if a dog has separation anxiety, but also has a reactivity outside, if I could have somebody else dealing with the reactivity, I'd say that would probably be easier because you can only focus on one aspect, but the
Hmm.
rest is also taken care of, basically.
Yeah, yeah, that's brilliant. No, it makes total sense, and as always, setting your dog up for success always makes sense. So it's
Yeah.
brilliant. Lea, thank you so much for coming on and talking about such an important and huge topic. We really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. That was lovely.
Thank you very much. And once again, a huge thank you to Lea for coming on and sharing such valuable information with us on the podcast this week. If you could do us a huge favor, it would be amazing if you would share out this podcast episode with your friends, your family, your followers, or even your clients that might have something to gain from listening to it. Also, if you would like to check out what we at Ruby Reese get up to, or what Lea gets up to on our day-to-day basis, you can find our websites and our social media handles all in the show notes. Additionally, if you'd like to help this podcast a little bit, you can follow, subscribe, or rate us wherever you listen to this podcast. It really, really does help us to get out to more dog lovers. And otherwise, all we have left to say is see you again next Tuesday for another podcast episode, and hope you have a lovely week.